When in the early years, those first 5 or 7 years, we give children that safety, what happens is they learn how to follow their own intuitive voice. They learn to connect with their ability to read a room or read an environment.
Welcome to Empowered Kids TV, where we introduce you to the people and ideas to help you take action and create the family of your dreams. By her own mother's admission, our guest today was born an intense, sensitive, empathic power seeker. She has honed the gift of her sensitivity, developing the ability to decode misbehaviour and give a voice to the legitimate needs of our children. A speaker, author, and parenting coach, our guest is a Stanford University alumna and a leading expert in the field of highly sensitive children, who brings clarity, personal experience, and compassion to parents raising highly sensitive kids so that they can thrive in an otherwise desensitized world. What I love about our guest today is her ability to articulate the inner world of highly spirited kids and her ability to get in the trenches with parents, giving us step-by-step strategies to eliminate power struggles and inspire cooperation, kindness, and self-discipline. It is my pleasure to introduce you all to the amazing Melissa Schwartz. Melissa, welcome to Empowered Kids TV.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I'm happy to have you on. This is a long overdue discussion. I want to start by talking, and this was something your mom introduced me to many years ago, about temperament. And in the psychological community, highly sensitive kids, it's not looked upon as a disorder, but rather temperament. And so I wanted to start there by asking you if you can tell us a little bit about what that means to have a sensitive temperament, and then we can talk about how it shows up.
Yeah. So I love the way that you kind of laid out the question, because sometimes people think about a sensitive child as having a disorder, as though it's something we need to fix or change or repair or recover them from. And none of those things are true. The child or adult who's highly sensitive is hardwired in a way that is, yes, more challenging most of the time, more needy, it's a bigger experience, you know. Sometimes I like to use the metaphor of cars to kind of explain the highly sensitive child and the non-highly sensitive child, or what I would call neurotypical, because there is no normal, you know, there is no baseline, there's no appropriate way for a child to be. And so I like to think about the neurotypical child, the child who's not very high needs or very demanding, like a Prius, like a fuel efficient, low maintenance vehicle. They're going to get you where you need to go. They don't ask a whole lot. They don't care what kind of gas you put in. They don't care if you get the oil changed. They don't care if it's dirty or if there's a crack in the windshield. They're still going to do their job. The highly sensitive child is like a Porsche, like a high needs, high performance sports car that is very demanding. It has, it needs certain fuel. It needs routine maintenance. It wants to be clean and shiny. If there's a crack in the windshield, it is not at its peak performance. And so the highly sensitive child is just hardwired to have these bigger needs. Now, the difference between buying a car and having a child is that when you purchase a vehicle, you get to choose how much investment, how much maintenance.
Yes.
And when you have a child, you have no say over their temperament. Temperament, for people who are not familiar with this term, or sometimes we interchangeably use the word hardwiring, is the way a child is born into life. This is just like you can't turn a Porsche into a Prius or a Prius into a Porsche. You can't turn a highly sensitive child into a neurotypical child. It's not possible. And if you try, what ends up happening is that child grows up with shame and inadequacy, and they feel like there's something wrong with them because they don't function the way that the other vehicles in their family function, when in fact what they need is to learn their own maintenance routines, their own ability to read their check engine lights and know why they're having a hard time and tantrums and falling apart, so that then they can become their own mechanic and keep themselves functional. The last thing I'm going to say here is is a Prius that is in peak performance, perfectly maintained, is not going to be as much fun to drive as a Porsche that is perfectly maintained. And so if you've got a sensitive child and you're thinking, oh my God, I have all this work to do, the upside is that when you meet the needs of this highly sensitive child, they are the most loving, caring, funny, intelligent, creative, wonderful people to be around. When they are functioning on all cylinders, they are like the best of the best. Not to say that not neurotypical people aren't the best of the best. They're the best of the best in their own way, you know?
You know what? I couldn't stop smiling. So I have two kids. One of them is very much a highly sensitive kid. And every word you said, I felt like you were describing him exactly. And I'm like, how does she know? Let's talk about some of the traits that we would see. You know, the part of that conversation that I love is the notion that we don't have to try to fix kids.
Yeah.
And I would say early in my parenting journey, because I'm also the parent of a sensitive child, I felt like I needed him to be the way I was. And so there was clearly something wrong with you, right? You can't be melting down for all of these things. So I'm going to have to try to figure out how to fix you so you can fit into my mold. And when I realized the error of my ways and I let go of that, it was the beginning of a beautiful journey of being able to understand and explore and enjoy each other. So for me, I just wanted to kind of touch base on that point again, because I think it's so powerful for parents to get. So let's talk a little bit about some of the behavior traits, like what we would see in order to be able to identify if we do have a highly sensitive child.
Yeah. So sometimes I struggle to answer this question because it's not one particular set of traits. So I always love to give, to honor Elaine Aaron's work. Dr. Elaine Aaron wrote many, many books on highly sensitive children, highly sensitive people. And based on her research, what we know is that there are several, I like to think about them as splits in the way that we look at highly sensitive children. So the first one is around introversion and extroversion. About 70% of highly sensitive people are introverts, and only about 30% of them are extroverts. I'm an extroverted, highly sensitive person. So I already kind of split off from that, you know, the bulk of highly sensitive people. People that are extroverted, highly sensitive people tend to almost look highly sensitive and not. In other words, let me take a step back and give you the four common traits that Elaine Aaron describes for highly sensitive people, and then we can talk about how it shows up in introverts and extroverts. So she uses a model, she calls it DOES. The D stands for depth of processing, which means that highly sensitive people process deeply. Anything from a conversation that we have to watching a film or a TV show, or the emotions that we experience, it takes us a long time, and we like to process deeply. We find benefit in it. We find it rewarding. There are some children who might watch a movie or read a book, and then for days later, they're asking questions about the characters and why did that happen and why did they feel that way and are they okay? You know, even these inanimate characters. And so highly sensitive adults do the same. We tend to process, and there are also two different ways to process. We can sort of ruminate and stay on what I call like a hamster wheel of it shouldn't have been that way and it wasn't fair and I don't like it, or we can process to get somewhere where we sort of take an internal journey and we move from an experience to a deeper understanding. That's where there's real benefit to being deep processors. The second part of her model is the O, which stands for overstimulation or over-arousal. The way I like to think about it, I once had a colleague explain to me that the idea is sort of, if you think about a bathtub, highly sensitive people, they fill up quickly, but they drain slowly. So we might take in a lot of stimulation either through our senses or emotionally and energetically and become full, but it takes us a longer time to kind of empty back out and decompress. And in sensitive children, whether they're introverted or extroverted, what tends to happen is they reach a level of overstimulation or overarousal, and then they have a tantrum. And we usually see this like picking up little ones from school. They'll fall apart on the way home, or if they've been at a birthday party or at a family event and they're holding it together and then they just fall apart. It's like there's just a tipping point. It's that straw that breaks them, and then they just fall apart. Sensitive adults are the same way. You might be getting through your whole day and doing okay, and then you hear a shriek from the other room and you just fall apart and lose it, because that kind of puts you over the edge of your arousal state. The third part of her model is the E, which talks about empathy or emotions. And that's because sensitive people feel things deeply. I like to explain this like, if you think about a box of crayons, you know, when you go to the store, you can buy that sort of value pack that's like 8 or 10 crayons, or the super value is like 164. Highly sensitive people have the super value pack. We have more emotions, more nuanced, more saturated, more intense. You know, if a neurotypical person feels anger and happiness and sadness and joy, we feel despair and despondency and hopelessness and ecstasy and bliss and delight and whimsy. It's like sensitive people just have more subtleties to the emotions that they experience, which can make it really hard for children to explain what's going on, because they don't have the vocabulary to put to what they're experiencing. And then the last part of her model, the S, stands for sensing subtleties. I like to explain this as though it's everything from sort of surface subtleties, like if a child sees an adult and says, "Oh, your hair's a different color," or "Oh, that your lips are a different color," or "Did you get a haircut?" or to things like they smell something that doesn't smell good, or the light is too bright, or it's a little too loud. No, it's not loud enough. Like they're looking for the very refined details in life. I also, now here's again where one of those other splits kind of comes in. Some children feel energetically very deeply. Not all highly sensitive children, but some highly sensitive children, they're empaths, where they can feel the emotions of other people. So they might walk in a room and say, "I don't like that person," or "I really like that person." You know, I'm the person in the supermarket or, you know, standing in line where kids like smile at me because they can feel that I'm safe, right? Whereas there are some adults that kids like they'll hide and they'll cower because they can feel that it's unsafe or something doesn't feel good to them. Yeah. And so all highly sensitive children are not empaths, but many are, and we don't know the exact numbers on that. The science has a hard time measuring that sort of experience. But the children that are extroverts also tend to be the power seekers, strong-willed. They know what they want. My mom tells a story, I don't know if she ever shared this with you, about when I was about 2 or 3. I was climbing on some furniture and she said, "Melissa, that chair is not for climbing." And I looked her right in the eye and kept climbing, you know. These are those kids, the ones who they are laser focused on what they want and there is really no stopping them. Those kids need very clear boundaries. They need a lot of healthy power, which I help parents understand how to create that throughout the day for their children. The introverted sensitive children usually aren't quite as power seeking in that way. They might be a little more in their own world, a little more imaginative, a little more inwardly focused. The other thing that I tend to find with most sensitive children, again, these are now kind of broad generalizations, is that they like 1 or 2 close friendships. They're not going to be a popular kid at school where they're friends with everybody, because they like deeper conversation. They like meaningful connection. So they tend to find 1 or 2 friends that they feel really good with, whether they're introverts or extroverts for the most part. Again, that's kind of a sweeping generalization. But once we start to look at behaviors, the things that are most common that generally tell me that a child is highly sensitive is they're either what we would consider, now I mean no judgment when I use these words, picky or fussy or particular or very persistent, very strong-willed, very aware of how things feel or smell or are affecting them, or they've got your number, they're calling you out on everything. Sometimes I say that the sensitive kids are like the canary in the coal mine. They're saying, "Mommy, are you mad? Mommy, are you happy?" They're trying to figure out what they're picking up on in the world. So those are sort of some of the sweeping ways that we can get to know that a child is highly sensitive.
There's so much in that. So I love that you're saying don't expect all highly sensitive people, whether they're kids or adults, to be the same, because it's all different. So I would tell you what was my first sign for my son that there was a difference in sensitivity. It was physical things. So as a baby, the vacuum cleaner and the pressure cooker just set it, like literally we would have to take him out of the house to use those things because he would be in a right state of panic. And I also remember him maybe at around 5 or 6 at his birthday party, and it was just a bunch of boys and they all sang happy birthday and he burst into tears and I'm like, "Why are you crying?" And he's like, "They're so loud." and without understanding, you think they're loud, it's a bunch of boys. But it was those things that kind of clued me in that he was sensing and feeling the world very differently. And my 2 boys are very close in age, so it was easy to identify the differences. So why I had to take one out of the house of the vacuum cleaner, the other one rode the vacuum cleaner like it was a horse, so you had to pull him around. So they were completely different in their approach to the world. And I think what I loved about the notion of not trying to fix and leaning into how he saw the world was that statement you made at the end there when you said the canary in the coal mine. I saw the gold in that experience. I saw that sensitive people among us and within our communities were the ones that were able to see a broader perspective, to be able to look ahead, to see consequences in a different way, natural consequences in a different way to the rest of us, almost to be like our warning signal and to keep the rest of us safe. And so it was a different appreciation of what different temperaments can bring to a community if we all can embrace them rather than trying everybody to fit into one mold. So I really love that. You talked about Dr. Aaron's work, and there's a few things that she touches on that I wanted us to kind of talk a little bit about. So one was the sensitive child's sense of caution. And so I was wondering if you can touch on that for a little bit for us so that we could understand how that's different. Because for a lot of adults who don't understand what's happening for a sensitive child, it's easy to dismiss the child behavior as silly.
Yeah.
And really there's something else happening. So can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So sensitive children and some adults, let me, even before I go there, just say that what I find the difference between sensitive children and sensitive adults is that adults often bring some wounding into their behavior in adulthood. And so there are more factors to look at. So, when we're looking at children who are cautious, it's closer to the temperament. When sensitive adults are cautious, I wonder what has gone on in their life. If they are hypervigilant, if there was some trauma, if there was some woundedness. With the children that are more cautious, they are, again, sensitive people, as you said, are big picture thinkers. They are processing. So in other words, if you take a 4-year-old to a playground and there's a very tall play structure and a ladder and things to climb, they may first observe other children, how they're climbing and how they're going. Are they having fun or are they scared before they venture in? A non-highly sensitive child might just, boom, run right into it, but these sensitive kids are observing first. They're noticing. There was one other differentiation around looking at sensitive behavior that I didn't add, but I think it's important to add here, which is called sensation seeking. Now, you can have high sensation seekers that are highly sensitive or not highly sensitive. A sensation seeker kind of goes into some broader categories, but the general idea behind it is that they're looking for novel experiences in life, whether they are emotionally novel or physically novel. In other words, they're trying new things. Most highly sensitive people, again, it's about 70%, but it's not an overlap with the introvert. You can have an introverted sensation seeker who's highly sensitive. Okay, so there are all different combinations. That's why I was saying it's so hard to offer these general behaviors. But the sensation seeker is looking for the new experience. So a sensitive sensation seeker in childhood might go onto the playground and want to climb on the scary toys for a just purely sensitive child. The difference between a sensitive sensation seeker and a non-highly sensitive sensation seeker is that the sensitive person is pausing to assess the risk. They are taking the time to observe before they jump into it. I had a conversation with Dr. Tracy Cooper, who talks a lot about sensation seeking. And I once asked him, how do you know the difference between a highly sensitive sensation seeker and non-highly sensitive sensation seeker in adulthood? For example, somebody who's a paraglider or engaged in this really risky physical behavior. And what he said was the non-highly sensitive sensation seeker may not survive an event because they aren't assessing risk. The sensitive sensation seeker is assessing risk. They are much slower and more deliberate in their risk taking. So I know I kind of blended a lot of information into your question, but in childhood, the highly sensitive child tends to be a little more reserved. The other piece of this, again, my mom tells a story that when I was 4 or 5, I used to kind of hide behind her leg when we would go into a new environment and be really slow to warm. Now, there are a couple of pieces of that. One, I believe, is children are assessing the energy as they walk in, right? They're kind of feeling out, is this safe? Do I want to play here? Or do I want to stay close to my safety, my parent, right? The second piece of it is observing before engaging and kind of taking notice. Now, my mom tells that when I was little, and she was a teacher, so she knew my teachers because she taught in the school that I went to. And sometimes my teachers would say to her, push Melissa, make her go off on her own. And my mom said, no, she's not ready. And so when in the early years, those first 5 or 7 years, we give children that safety, what happens is they learn how to follow their own intuitive voice. They learn to connect with their ability to read a room or read an environment. And my mom sometimes when she talks about this says, I've gone on in adulthood, I've traveled to almost 40 countries, most of them by myself, because I learned from an early age how to listen to my intuitive voice, how to read a room, how to read people, how to follow what feels safe and right to me. So very, very early, what happens with these sensitive kids is they're playing with some of the bells and whistles of their Porsche. They're figuring out how to use their cruise control and their autopilot and their navigation system. And they're not ready to be out there on their own yet. And so the child who's kind of reading the room and assessing can have a couple of different things that are going on. But as long as they're getting the message of, it's okay, take your time. When you're ready, you'll know you're ready. And if you need me, I'm going to be here for you. That is actually what sets them up to be able to go out on their own later in life. That early push or pushing them too much too soon will actually create some wounding for them and maybe cause more hypervigilance down the road.
I'll tell you my experience from a parenting perspective of 2 kids that are different in terms of temperament. I think as parents, we run the risk of doing that to all of our kids by being so in control of what they do, telling them how to think, when to go, or how to come, that we rob them of the opportunity from a young age of tuning in. But I think the difference from my experience with highly sensitive kids is that they almost demand the time and the space so that they can tune in. Like they say, you don't get to tell me, I have to feel first. And I think that was different to my other son who wasn't highly sensitive. He was like, all right, then I'll just go along because you said, you didn't. And from a parenting perspective, that makes it easier.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you think, well, why can't you just go along? Yeah. But I think when you stop and you recognize, especially when you begin to value those things. Like I've learned to value my kids' exercise of their own intuition, because I know that first of all, it's the best guidance they can have, even better than mine. And secondly, I wouldn't always be there, and they have to tune in. So, all right, let's talk about the view of consequences. So how do sensitive people view consequences? And I don't mean consequences as in punishment, like consequences as looking at, if this happens, then that will happen next.
Well, again, because sensitive people are big picture thinkers, they are looking at consequences. You know, sensitive children, I want to say this really delicately because I know that the parents listening to this are probably struggling or they wouldn't be listening. Sensitive children do really well when they have, quote, good consequences in place. And when I say good, I mean effective consequences that make sense to the children, that encourage them to do well, to make the right choices. I love helping parents with discipline because that's where so often things are put in place that are slightly askew, that then create these ripple effects that don't work for the kids. It's sort of like, again, if you think back to the car metaphor, and I should say, I really don't know a whole lot about cars. So I apologize if any of my metaphors are a little off. But it's almost like if you get the alignment on the car assessed, but it's a little askew, and now you're driving the car and you wonder, why does it keep moving? It's like, well, yes, you got the alignment done, but it wasn't done properly. And so the results of the alignment are now skewed. And so when parents use consequences with their sensitive kids, but they're what I would, again, I'm using air quotes, they're bad consequences. They're ineffective. They are actually creating more struggle for the child that's then amplifying the unwanted behavior. Those kids are going to struggle. So I want to gently say that when you can create consequences that work for the child, they thrive. It's like, it's becomes so much easier for parents and children to be together. But I once had a client say to me, it's hard to see the label of the jar when you're inside. And I think parents often struggle to step out of what's going on to look at it objectively, which is why I love doing coaching, because I'm on the outside looking in, and I just want everybody to be happy. So much easier. And I can very often see. Yeah.
So much easier from that place, isn't it, Melissa?
So much. So much. Yeah.
I wanna also talk about the conscientiousness. So Dr. Aaron also talks about this. And I've seen it in my own parenting journey where there's almost an internal dialogue that says when something wrong happens, it isn't just that an event happened that didn't go according to expectation, but somehow I'm responsible. And there's a real sense of ownership from highly sensitive people. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think some of that also comes from the messages, like, again, I don't want to sound like I'm being critical here. I often hear parents use language like, what a good boy, or you're such a good girl, or you did such a good job. And from a very early age, we apply like value based on performance. And when a child has a breakdown, they're still a good boy or a good girl. They're having a really hard time and they need some help. And so to me, that it's a sign of really early woundedness, and it's a loving wake-up call to the parents to make some shifts. That's all it is. Nothing is permanent. You haven't ruined a child. You haven't broken their spirit. It's an indication that they're needing some more from you. And again, if the parents and most of the children are Priuses and you have a Porsche, and you've been treating this Porsche the way you treat the Prius, this Porsche is not going to run at its peak performance. Not because you are bad or because they are bad. It's because there are things that you need to learn to meet their bigger needs. And based on the scenario that you're sharing here, it sounds to me like there are some mismatched needs that are going on, where the child is getting these messages that who they are is not okay, or how they handled it is not okay. And I also want to say that living with a sensitive child is not easy. It is intense. They don't ever give you a break. They're needy all hours of the day. And what I always remind my clients that I work with, the families that I work with, is if you can, in the first 5 to 7 years, really give them what they need. If you can say to yourself, it won't be like this forever, and I'm doing this for the long payoff. It's sort of like when you buy a car and you take really good care of it in those first few years, it'll run really well. If you don't maintain it in those first few years, it's going to have a lot of issues down the road. It's that same idea. So if you can give them what they need, and here's the other thing is, I believe all children, but especially highly sensitive children, in those first 5 to 7 years, that's really, kind of the window. What they need the most, in my opinion and experience, is to understand, to identify, recognize, and express their emotions. That is the most important thing. When they learn how to recognize what they're feeling and put language to it, and make a request to soothe that emotion, they're going to cruise through life. And the reason why so many parents struggle to help their children do this is because we didn't get it in our early years, and we struggle to do it for ourselves. And so if you have a sensitive child who is pushing you to do this work, it is a gift. It is a blessing for the entire family, because they're forcing you to do the work of coming to be really intimate and connected with your emotions, which most adults don't have, which is why we struggle and we go to therapy, or we turn to substances, or we shut down, or, we're angry at the whole world. We feel victimized because we haven't made peace with our inner world. So when these children get that from an early age, they don't have to feel responsible for something going wrong, or, misdirect their sense of self-worth based on an experience. They can say like, oh, that I didn't like that. I'm going to do it differently next time,
I love that. I think so. What I've seen with my son, so my son is now he's in early teens, but I think because he's had that safe space in his younger years to just be all of himself fully, thankfully to your mom, he's had that safety of recognizing that who he is valuable just because of who he is. And what I've seen now in his early teens, as he's trying to navigate things outside of the home, new social scenarios, new challenges within the school environment, that he has a sense of confidence of finding his own way in his own time. So I remember when he started so we call secondary school, you would probably call high school, like his dad was really concerned for him to get into a social circle. And he was like, nope, I'll be all right. You just leave me to it. And he took his time. And as you said in the beginning, he made just 1 or 2 friends. And that was fine for him. And he's been comfortable. But he had the sense of confidence to say, I will do it my way. And I will be okay. So what I wanted to kind of dive into now is to kind of share some tips and strategies for parents on how they can create that safe space to really, first in their communication, but also in allowing their kids to feel like who I am is just okay in every moment.
Yeah. Well, the first step is for a parent to really believe it, is to really believe that their child is okay. I'll be honest, when I work with parents that are very successful in their professional careers, they're usually really hard for me to coach, because they have these ideas of who their child is going to become, or they really push back when I say, your child is on a different path than you were. Yes, that worked for you. And this child might not want that sort of life or career. They might not value the same things that you value. Sensitive people tend to value connection and relationship, and how they feel over status and money and celebrity, which to the outside world might be like, oh, what's wrong with you? Nothing. It's what makes me happy, you know? So the first piece is really for parents to find their own peace about who their children are. You know, it's so easy for us to put our goals and expectations and dreams onto a child, but that might not be their path. In terms of language to use, again, in general terms, I think what works really well for sensitive children is when parents mirror what they're seeing their child experience. And saying things like, you must feel really proud of yourself for doing that, or I can tell you felt really happy being on that stage, or you look, your face is all lit up while you're painting that, or I loved watching you giggle playing with the dog. In other words, giving back to the child what you're seeing them excel with, rather than putting any judgment on it, like, you did such a good job getting on that stage, you know, or you're such a good girl for painting that picture, right? Those offer a different, I know that these are kind of semantics, but they offer a very different experience for the recipient. In those first statements, it's about celebrating the joy that the child is feeling and allowing them to do more of what makes them happy. You know, we all know intrinsically what makes us feel good. And when we're given permission to do it without it being judged, then we can thrive, you know, then the doors continue to open. The other thing that I feel called to share here to parents of sensitive children, again, my mom may have already shared this with you at some point, but I have an older brother who is not highly sensitive. He was, you know, he's just always had this clear path for his career and kind of his life, and things, at least to me, it seems like they came easy to him. He might have a different story, but my mom will often describe his path in life as being like a runway, like an airport runway that was just lit up and he just had to get on it and go, you know. And again, those parents who have those kids probably are not listening to this conversation because they're probably not struggling, you know. Those kids are easy to be with. And I would also say in adulthood, those people, their level of fulfillment is it's a smaller spectrum than a highly sensitive person's. In other words, sensitive people have a broader capacity for joy and sadness, for success and disappointment. Whereas these neurotypical people, they just have a more narrow experience. There's no judgment in that, right? Now, I, as a sensitive person, didn't have a lit up path. My mom and I joke that it was like I was walking through a forest with a machete and just cutting down the branches one step at a time. And as the parent, she would often worry that I would fall over a cliff, you know, that like the next step would just be this. And I think a lot of sensitive parents of sensitive kids feel that way, like, but how can I trust that they're going to be okay? How can I know that they're going to have a good job and support themselves and be happy? And here's the key, is when you help a child develop their intuition, their intuitive voice, that's like their compass. And as long as you're pointed in the right direction, all you need is one step at a time. You don't have to see the whole path. You just have to know that you're pointed in the right direction. And that's why developing that intuition from such an early age, that emotional language, that connection to our own inner world is so invaluable, because that is what keeps your kids from going off the cliff down the road. And so there's no, even if you have a child born on this straight runway, you don't know that COVID won't hit and their firm won't close, or you know, all of these things. Like, there are no guarantees in life, but when you know how to follow your intuition, when you know how to tune into your particular path, it's okay if it's a little bumpy. That's part of the journey. You know, sensitive people are here for a more robust experience all around. And so having that inner trust as the parent that it is going to be okay, that you are here to lovingly hold them as they find their path, as they guide their way through life. I think that's the biggest piece of this, is finding that own inner peace that trust and belief that they are okay, that they will be okay as they continue to grow.
It's beautiful. How do you help parents who are themselves highly sensitive
Yeah.
and then have a highly sensitive kid, but they kind of clash on each other? How do you help those
Yeah.
parents cope?
So it's fascinating because I've been doing this work for about a decade at this point, and it's amazing how many parents come to me to fix their child, and then once we start talking, they realize that they're highly sensitive and they didn't know it, you know. And so the first piece is in that scenario is to help the parent understand their unique sensitivity and where their woundedness is, because if you're an adult and you don't recognize that you're highly sensitive, something happened that kind of shut it down for you. I think what you're more asking about, though, is the parent who's aware that they're highly sensitive, who's overwhelmed, who's overstimulated by that child. And so with those parents, what I first help them do is establish healthy boundaries. Because when they can set up their day with the child so that they're not with the child 24/7, they're not, one thing I see frequently with sensitive children and a sensitive parent, usually a sensitive mom, is the child is like grounding through the parent. The child is finding their calm through the parent, which is draining for the parent. And so I help the parent establish their own energetic boundaries and help that child establish their own grounding, their own stability, so that they're not using the parent as this constant medium to find their connection to being in the world. I think a lot of sensitive children, I for sure experienced in my early years, even though I don't have these cognitive memories, being like, I cannot handle this place. I don't belong here. It's too much. And it's because I didn't feel grounded. You know, I didn't feel like I had my own connection, my own anchor to the world. And so that's kind of one of the starting places that I'll go with parents. Is,
you know, I chuckle as you said that, because that's exactly how your mom described you as a child. But I can just imagine how scary that experience is for a child, to feel like I don't belong and I don't fit in. And especially when the adults around you who you want to lean on, they don't have an understanding of what you're going through.
Yes.
And they view that the way you're behaving is something to fix. That can feel really isolating and scary for a little child.
Absolutely. And I mean, I have memories of being a child and thinking, like, you want me to do it differently, but I can't. This is the only way I know how to do it, you know? And so that's why these children really need like deep understanding and compassion. And even if the best you can say to them is, this is really big for you, this feels really, really big for you, I wish I knew how to help you with it. You know, just even validating for them that this feels scary, or it feels overwhelming, or it feels intense, or something doesn't feel right for you, instead of what's wrong with you. You know, just that one shift will change a child's entire experience.
Do you kind of suggest to parents that they share what being highly sensitive means to a child in a child-friendly way? So I'll tell you why I asked that question. I remember at one point when I was struggling to explain to my son his experiences versus everybody else's. There was a documentary on highly sensitive people, and we played that documentary and we watched it together. And what was really surprising was how happy he was to see that there were other people like me. That's exactly what he said. There's other people like me. And so I was just curious if that's really something you suggest to parents, to be open to sharing, that this isn't something to be scared of, but this is just the way you view the world, and it's a beautiful gift.
Yeah, I would say in an age appropriate way, absolutely. You know, the science, the research says it's about 15 to 20% of the population, although now research is maybe saying even up to 25% of the population. So 1 in 4 or 5 people are highly sensitive. And it's not just humans. We find the trait in dogs, in deer, and they've researched it in fruit flies. How they can research anything in fruit flies, I don't know, but that's what the science shows. And so, yeah, I would suggest telling children, absolutely, because my parents used to have a dog that was highly sensitive. Yeah, and there was no doubt about this dog was highly sensitive. And so when children know that there's nothing wrong with them, in fact, there's so many people that are like them, it's very reassuring. I have a very clear memory of when I read Elaine Aaron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person. I devoured it in like a weekend, and I texted a picture of the cover of it to all of my girlfriends who are highly sensitive, and I was like, oh my god, this is us, there's nothing wrong with us. And it was so validating, because sensitive people know they're different. They know that they're different. A Porsche, if it had awareness, would know that it performs differently than all of these Priuses. They know there's an awareness. And yet for so much of my life, I felt like there was something wrong. You know, I had testing done when I was younger for academic stuff, and trying to figure out what it was, because there was clearly something different about me. But we, as a society, as a global society, we look at difference as though it's bad, as though like we're not all different. Like, who's not different? Who's the normal that's the not different? Like, what, you know? And so, yeah, I think helping children understand, and you can use language like, you feel things more deeply than other people do, you know, or you notice things that other people don't notice. You don't have to get into the whole details of it, but helping them understand that they're more keen, they're more perceptive, they're big picture thinkers. I had a conversation with a woman who worked in HR, and she was wanting to know, like, what are the gifts and talents that highly sensitive people bring? We're more discerning. You know, we care about how everybody is impacted. So it's all a matter of the way that you phrase it for the children. Helping them know that they're different, it might feel isolating, but helping them know that they feel things really deeply. And maybe that's why that child isn't crying. Maybe that's why those boys don't mind the singing at the birthday party. And for you, you're right, for you, it was too loud. It was too loud. Maybe next year we'll have everybody whisper. Or maybe at your birthday parties, we don't sing. What would feel best for you, sweetheart? You know, and then giving them the strength and the power to ask for what they want. You know, they might not even want the birthday party. They might not like being the center of attention. They might prefer to go with one friend to see a movie to celebrate, or do something smaller. And when we as the adults stop projecting how it needs to be, because this was our vision, and we allow this child to tune in and we say, things affect you that don't affect other people. How would you like to celebrate your birthday? Then they're in the driver's seat. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, Melissa. Before I ask my last question, tell everybody where we can find out more about your work, more about Sandy's work, and how they can dive in.
Yeah, so my mom and I work together, if anybody's not aware of that. We coach at Leading Edge Parenting, so you can go to leadingedgeparenting.com. We're on Facebook. We also have a Facebook group for parents of highly sensitive children, where you can interact with both of us and find a whole global community of parents that have highly sensitive children. And from what I hear from the parents in it, it's very reassuring to know that you're not alone, and to get to talk with other parents who are having similar experiences. Yeah.
Have somebody to bounce off of the crazy experience you had 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
What it means to you to live an empowered life.
To me, living an empowered life is embracing all of the emotions. It is coloring with every crayon in the box, and knowing that they all have an appropriate place. And at the end of my life, I hope that the good feeling crayons are colored all the way down to the bottom, and the bad feeling crayons are only lightly touched. But to know that I can touch all of them and be okay. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us. This was a really powerful conversation. And one, even though I've been on this journey for a while, I think still reminded me of some of the things that I need to refocus on so that we have more joy and fun together. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. And your children, your sensitive son in particular, how blessed he is to have you as his mom who gets him and sees him and has supported him in the way you have. Makes my heart so happy.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Empowered Kids TV. If this is your first time with us, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you'll be notified of upcoming episodes. And remember, it still takes a village. So if you found value in this episode, be sure to like it and share it with your family and friends. We've given you 2 other episodes that we think you will just love and find lots of value from. As we always say here in the village, you're just one connection away. With love and gratitude empowers. Until next time.